This program is rated PG. It contains themes and scenes which may not be suitable for very young audiences. Parental guidance is advised.
Be advised that the views and opinions of the hosts and guests do not reflect those of the station.
Welcome to Usapang Bayan. Ako po si George Chua kasama ang aking co-host na si Rach Marquez. Pag-uusapan po natin ang bagong administrasyon at iba pang mga pangyayari sa ating bayan.
Makakapanayan po natin para sa gabing ito si Senior Consultant to the Special Envoy to China, Mr. Raffy Alunan. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Rach and George.
Well, first of all, we'd like to thank you for joining us again in our program. If you recall, we were able to interview you during the campaign.
Yes, that's right.
And siguro ho, umpisahan natin na ano ho ba ang ibig sabihin ng Senior Consultant to the Special Envoy to China? Ano ho bang ibig sabihin nun?
That means that I am a consultant of President Ramos. Si President Ramos may official designation from the Philippine government, a Special Envoy. And he reports to President Duterte. Ako naman, since I cannot be appointed by the government because there's a one-year ban,
Right.
having lost in the senatorial race, I work for President Ramos. That's why my title is Special Consultant to the Special Envoy.
Senior Consultant.
Senior consultant, yes.
Maybe at this point, sir, I know that you've been to China a number of times. May we know where we are at this point in terms of the discussions in terms of the West Philippine Sea with the Chinese government?
Well, I can only discuss the generalities because embargoed yung mga specifics, no?
Of course, sir.
But in our first meeting in Hong Kong, we broke the ice. President Ramos succeeded in breaking the ice with our counterparts. And it was aided by the fact that he was talking to friends of President Ramos, namely Madame Fu Ying, who was the former ambassador to the Philippines from 1998 to 2000, and Dr. Wu Xi-chun, who is the president of the South China Sea Institute, based in Hainan. As you know, President Ramos used to chair the BOA Forum in Hainan, so doon sila nakakilala, and that's how he deepened his friendships with other people. The intent of that meeting in Hong Kong was to break the ice and to discuss areas of potential cooperation. The themes that prevailed during our talks were peace, cooperation, human security, ecological security. And in the course of the two-day discussions, we were able to identify areas where we could cooperate. For example, identifying areas in the South China Sea as marine preserves, in other words, no-touch areas, particularly areas that have been impacted by climate change and by man-made practices that destroyed the coral seabeds and in the process affected food security. without corals kasi you can't have fish, you know,
Yes.
so it impacts on food security. We also talked about the possibility of cooperating with among the claimant countries in the South China Sea in the area of scientific research to find out how our scientists could mitigate the impact of climate change on the coral seabeds and on fish catches. So that's the other one. And second, third, in relation to extreme weather spawned by climate change, we talked about international cooperation, where our military assets would be used to save lives rather than to destroy lives. And so that fell under the topic of humanitarian assistance and disaster rescue. And since we were talking also about rising above our selfish national interests and dealing or addressing the common good, the peoples, humanity, humankind, the peoples of all nations affected by climate change and by man's imperfections. We talked about international cooperation to fight crime, terror, smuggling, and other transnational crimes. And therefore, that calls for a consolidation or rather the cooperation of our law enforcement agencies and law enforcement assets out at sea, like our Coast Guard, our BFAR, etc. So there were many, many areas that we discussed that found their way in our joint statement. That joint statement now serves as our springboard for future discussions, where we could pick out areas where we could immediately
Resolve.
work together
Yes.
and convert that into specific confidence-building measures. Because based on the understanding of both sides, it's important to get confidence-building measures
In place.
mapped out,
Yes.
implemented before we get to bilateral negotiations. So for those who are wondering whether we're there to already negotiate, no, the answer is no. We're there to map out our confidence-building measures before bilateral negotiations are undertaken by both governments. And that's probably farther down the road. No?
Will it be the same people that will handle the actual negotiations with respect to the disputed areas in the West Philippine Sea?
That will probably be a track one. That means government to government.
I see.
We are straddling between track one and track two. Track one because the former president represents the president, so therefore he has an official designation. On the other hand, it's also track two because we are talking about potential areas of cooperation that are not yet leading to agreements. Actual agreements will have to be handled by both governments, no, not by us.
Some say, sir, that defending our claims in the West Philippine Sea is a matter of life and death. What is your reaction?
Well, if you look at it from the standpoint of human and ecological security, if we keep on destroying our coral seabeds and impacting on fish catches, etc., if we don't do anything to work together to mitigate the impact of climate change, of course, yes, we will all suffer. Hindi lang tayo. It's not just the Filipinos, but everybody around the South China Sea.
Mr. Secretary, while we are at this stage of confidence-building measures,
Yes.
no, establishing trust, what is the current status of our ability of the fishermen, our fishermen, to fish in their traditional fishing territories, no, which apparently have been now become part of the disputed territories? What
That's a
is the
very
status
good
of
question, George, because Scarborough is actually at the top of our agenda. We'd like our poor fishermen to get back to their traditional fishing grounds without being harassed. And that was discussed. That was the first thing that we discussed in Hong Kong. And we're hoping that this could lead to a very specific confidence-building measure where Scarborough Shoal inside will be declared a no-touch zone so that to allow the coral seabeds to regenerate and the fish to come back. Right now, it's empty, it's devoid, no? And then identify the traditional fishing grounds around the shoal that will enable the poor fishermen, or what we call artisanal fishermen from both sides, to fish the way they were fishing before the incident, no? But that will require, for example, establishing the meets and bounds, no? Up to what point from the baseline of Scarborough Shoal will they be allowed? Is it up to 12 miles? Maybe up to 15 miles? We don't. That has to be agreed upon. The other is, what would be the size of the boats? Because they can't be commercial fishing. So probably the equivalent of what we call the basnig, no? Maybe up to 3 tons or 5 tons in terms of carrying capacity, and their equivalent in China and Vietnam. And third, how will we enforce? How do we prevent people from entering the shoal? How do we enforce the ruling that they can only fish within
Certain
the
areas.
certain area? So that's where we discussed the possibility of joint law enforcement patrols, no? But the devil is in the details, and that will have to be mapped out in the future.
So what is the current status? Still off limits now?
Right now, it's actually there is an usapan already not to harass, no, not to harass, but there's still some harassment going on. But it's sporadic. It's not sustained, no. Sometimes there is, sometimes there's none. I guess it all depends on the ship captain of the other side, whether he's really disciplined or not, etc.
But sir, are there measures being undertaken to secure the protection of our fishermen?
Well, that is the duty of the Coast Guard, no, and the Coast Guard is out there. And there was a time when I remember we were abroad that our fishermen were harassed by the Coast Guard of China, the Chinese Coast Guard, and our Coast Guard got in between. And there was even, I think, an attempt to ram our ships, but that didn't happen, no. So there's that, and what we're going to work for is the total absence of that in the future. No?
Well, we need to have a station break at this point. Sa amin pong pagbabalik, pag-usapan pa rin natin ang West Philippine Sea kasama si Secretary Raffy Alunan. Please stay tuned.